This documentary traces the remarkable life and spiritual journey of the late Pope Francis from his humble beginnings in Buenos Aires, Argentina, through his transformative leadership of the Catholic Church to his peaceful passing in March 2025.
Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum. Habemus Papa.
It is a story of faith, compassion, and conviction, a tribute to a shepherd who touched millions with his message of mercy, inclusion, and hope. In an era marked by uncertainty, a world yearning for truth, compassion, and moral clarity, one man emerged, not through displays of power or wealth, but through the quiet strength of humility. He did not seek the spotlight, yet the light found him. When he became the leader of over 1 billion Catholics, he chose a name that spoke volumes: Francis, after the saint who renounced riches for a life of simplicity and service. And like his namesake, he walked the path of the poor, the marginalized, and the forgotten. This is the profound journey of Pope Francis, born Jorge Mario Bergoglio, a son of immigrants from Buenos Aires who rose to become a global moral voice. His life, his ministry, and the legacy he leaves behind have not only transformed the papacy, but have stirred the conscience of modern Catholic Church and the world at large. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, who would one day become Pope Francis, was born on December 17, 1936, in a bustling city of Buenos Aires, Argentina. His birth came during a time of global economic uncertainty, just a few years before the outbreak of World War II. He was the firstborn child of Mario and Regina Bergoglio, a devout Catholic couple of Italian descent who had immigrated from Italy to Argentina in search of a better life. Growing up as the eldest of 5 siblings, young Jorge assumed a natural sense of responsibility earlier on, often helping to care for his younger brothers and sisters. His family lived in the modest, working-class neighborhood of Flores, an area marked by a strong sense of community, faith, and resilience. Here, amidst the narrow streets, small shops, and vibrant cultural life, Jorge developed the humility and compassion that would later define his pastoral mission. From an early age, he was exposed to the values of hard work, empathy, and service to others, traits instilled in him by his parents and reinforced by the Catholic faith that permeated his upbringing. These formative years in Flores laid the spiritual and emotional foundation for a man who would later dedicate his life to the church and to advocating for the poor and marginalized. As a young boy growing up in the vibrant and culturally rich neighborhoods of Buenos Aires, Jorge Mario Bergoglio was known not only for his quiet demeanor and thoughtful nature, but also for his deep love of learning and simple pleasures. He had a particular fondness for literature, often immersing himself in classic works by Argentine and European authors, while sparking his imagination and sharpened his ability to reflect on the human condition. Equally fascinated by the natural world, he pursued science with curiosity and discipline, a rare combination for a child of his environment. Another of his passions was football, Argentina's beloved national sport. Like many boys of his generation, he played in the streets with neighborhood friends, supporting his favorite team, San Lorenzo, with unwavering enthusiasm. Football taught him the values of teamwork, perseverance, and community principles that would remain central throughout his life. After completing his secondary education, Bergoglio chose a path not immediately destined for the priesthood. He enrolled in technical studies and graduated as a chemical technician, demonstrating both intellectual capacity and a hands-on practicality. He worked for a short period in a food laboratory where he applied his skills in chemistry and gained a first-hand appreciation for the dignity of labor. However, at the age of 21, everything changed. Amidst the rhythms of ordinary life, Jorge experienced a profound spiritual awakening, a deeply personal encounter that stirred within him a powerful sense of vocation. This moment of clarity, which he described as being touched by the mercy of God, would mark the turning point in his life. It set him on a path of faith, sacrifice, and devotion that would ultimately lead to the priesthood and many years later to the papacy. In 1958, at the age of 21, Jorge Mario Bergoglio took a decisive step that would define the rest of his life. He entered the novitiate of the Society of Jesus, commonly known as the Jesuits. Founded by St. Ignatius of Loyola in the 16th century, the Jesuit order is known for its deep intellectual tradition, strict discipline, and unwavering commitment to education, spiritual formation, and service to others. It was a path that demanded both the heart and the mind, a life of contemplation in action. Bergoglio embraced the Jesuit way of humility and determination. The rigorous formation process included years of spiritual training, study, and practical mission work. He was drawn to the order's ideals of missionary zeal, a preferential option for the poor, and a willingness to go wherever the need was greatest. These formative years shaped not only his theology but his worldview, centering on simplicity, justice, and a deep concern for human dignity. During this time, he immersed himself in philosophy and theology, sharpening his intellect while deepening his spiritual maturity. His studies were not merely academic exercises, but they were part of a transformative inner journey that would later inform his pastoral leadership and social teachings. He also taught literature, psychology, and theology at Jesuit institutions, showing early signs of an educator and thinker he would become. After more than a decade of spiritual formation and academic rigor, Bergoglio was ordained a Catholic priest on December 13, 1969. It was a moment of quiet but profound joy, a fulfillment of the calling he had first experienced years earlier. But even then, his journey was far from over. Recognizing his potential for leadership and depth of insight, his superiors sent him for advanced theological studies, further equipping him for the significant roles he would later assume within both the Society of Jesus and the Catholic Church. In the years following his ordination, Jorge Maria Bergoglio's dedication, intellect, and spiritual maturity became increasingly evident to his fellow Jesuits. His superiors recognized not only his deep theological understanding, but also his ability to lead with clarity and purpose. It was therefore fitting that he was eventually appointed rector of the very seminary where he had once been formed, a symbolic full circle in his spiritual and academic journey. As rector of the Jesuit seminary in San Miguel, Argentina, Bergoglio oversaw the formation of young Jesuits preparing for priesthoods. He held this role during a tumultuous time in Argentina's history, marked by political instability, social unrest, and rising authoritarianism. Amid these external challenges, Bergoglio remained steadfast in his mission to prepare principled, compassionate, and intellectually grounded priests for service in the church and the wider world. His leadership style at the seminary was firm but deeply pastoral. He believed in discipline as a tool not for control but for character formation. Seminarians under his guidance came to know him as a man of few words but deep insights, someone who demanded excellence yet understood human frailty. He encouraged simplicity, humility, and a closeness to the poor, values he himself lived daily. Bergoglio was also known for his personal availability. Despite his administrative duties, he made time for individual spiritual direction, confessions, and quiet conversations that often left a lasting impact. Under his guidance, the seminary became not just a place of study, but a crucible of moral formation where future priests were shaped not only as scholars but as servants of the people. This period as rector solidified Bergoglio's reputation within the Jesuit community and the broader church as a man of integrity, prudence, and spiritual depth, qualities that would later prepare him for even greater responsibilities within the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. In 1992, Jorge Mario Bergoglio's quiet but impactful ministry caught the attention of the Vatican. Recognizing his spiritual depth, pastoral sensitivity, and intellectual leadership, Pope John Paul II appointed him Auxiliary Bishop of Buenos Aires, marking his entry into the episcopal leadership of the Catholic Church. It was a pivotal moment in Bergoglio's life, signaling the beginning of a new chapter in which his influence would grow beyond the Society of Jesus to a broader Argentine church. As auxiliary bishop and later as coadjutor archbishop, Bergoglio began to take on greater responsibilities, serving the people of Argentina's capital with humility and resolve. In 1998, following the sudden death of Cardinal Antonio Quaracino, Bergoglio succeeded him and was appointed Archbishop of Buenos Aires. Now, the spiritual leader of one of the largest and most complex Catholic dioceses in Latin America, he faced a daunting task of shepherding millions of souls through a time of economic hardship and growing inequality. But it was not his title that defined him. It was how he chose to live it. From the moment he took office, Archbishop Bergoglio rejected the trappings of power and prestige. He refused to move into the opulent Archbishop's palace and instead chose to live in a small, modest apartment in downtown Buenos Aires. He cooked his own meals, did his own laundry, and most notably, traveled by public bus and train rather than using a chauffeur-driven car. These simple choices spoke volumes to the Argentine people, particularly the poor and working class, who saw him as a shepherd who worked among his flock, not above them. It was this radical simplicity and closeness to the marginalized that earned him the nickname El Obispo de las Villas, the slum bishop. Rather than focusing solely on cathedral walls, Bergoglio made regular visits to Villas Miseria, the impoverished shanty towns surrounding Buenos Aires, where he celebrated Mass, listened to the people, and stood in solidarity with those often forgotten by society. He spoke out boldly against corruption, economic injustice, and systems that exploited the poor, becoming a moral voice in a nation grappling with its identity and future. Through these acts of humility and courage, Bergoglio redefined what it meant to be a bishop in the modern age. He was not just a church leader, he was a servant of the people, a witness to the gospel, and a living embodiment of the church's call to stand with the least amongst us. In 2001, Jorge Mario Bergoglio's quiet and powerful ministry reached a new milestone when Pope John Paul II elevated him to the rank of cardinal. The ceremony, held at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, marked his formal inclusion into the College of Cardinals, those entrusted with advising the Pope and ultimately electing his successor. It was both a recognition of his leadership in Argentina and an invitation to bring his pastoral vision to the global church. As cardinal, Bergoglio was now one of the most senior Catholic leaders in the world. He was granted the red biretta and a titular church in Rome, signifying his new role as a principal advisor to the Vatican. For many, this would have been a moment of self-promotion, an opportunity to climb further up the ecclesiastical ladder, but Bergoglio remained true to the values that shaped his life. Even amidst the grandeur of political intrigue of the Roman Curia, he kept a low profile. He avoided media attention and declined most interviews. While other cardinals engaged in Rome's often complex web of influence and diplomacy, Bergoglio stood apart, preferring silence to spectacle, prayer to politicking. His interventions at Vatican meetings were brief, thoughtful, and focused on the gospel, not personal ambition or ideological battles. True to his character, he refused the luxurious accommodations often made available to visiting cardinals in Rome. Instead, he stayed in modest quarters, prepared his own meals when possible, and continued to travel without fanfare. His commitment to a simple, Christ-centered life remained unshaken, even in the heart of the church's administrative center. Yet, despite his quiet demeanor, his spiritual presence did not go unnoticed. Fellow bishops, theologians, and even Vatican insiders began to respect the Argentine cardinal, not for his political maneuvering, but for his authenticity. In a time when the church was facing scandals, divisions, and questions about its future, Cardinal Bergoglio embroidered a different kind of leadership, one rooted in humility, mercy, and a deep connection to the everyday struggles of ordinary people. He was a man who reminded the church of its soul by simply living as a servant. On the evening of March 13, 2013, as thousands gathered anxiously under umbrellas in a rain-soaked St. Peter's Square, white smoke billowed from the chimney of Sistine Chapel, signaling that the conclave of cardinals had reached a decision. The world held its breath as the name of the newly elected pope was about to be revealed. Moments later, from the central balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, the ancient Latin words sang out, Habemus Papam, we have a pope.
Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum, habemus papam.
The name announced was unfamiliar to many. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the Cardinal Archbishop of Buenos Aires. But what followed would immediately mark a new era. He had chosen the name Franciscus, Francis, the first pope in history to do so. In that single choice, he sent a powerful and symbolic message to the church and to the world. This would be a papacy defined not by grandeur, but by humility, compassion, and service. In that moment, history was made in several profound ways. He became the first pope from the Americas, hailing from Argentina, a land far from traditional centers of church power in Europe. It was a recognition of the growing vitality of the Catholic Church in the global South and a sign that the Vatican was listening to voices long at the margins. He was also the first Jesuit pope drawn from the ranks of the Society of Jesus, an order known for its intellectual rigor, missionary zeal, and vows of poverty. For a Jesuit to ascend to the papacy was for centuries unthinkable. Jesuits had traditionally declined hierarchical positions in the church, preferring to serve in the field, in schools, in slums, and on front lines of social change. Yet now, one of their own had been called to lead the entire Catholic world. And perhaps most strikingly, he was the first to choose the name Francis in honor of St. Francis of Assisi, the beloved 13th century saint who renounced wealth and embraced a life of radical poverty and peace. St. Francis was known for his care for the poor, his love for nature, and his simple, joyful spirit. In choosing this name, Pope Francis aligned himself with the legacy of reform, of compassion, and of a church for the poor. When he finally appeared on the balcony, dressed simply in white without a traditional red mozzetta, he bowed his head and asked the people for their prayers before blessing them himself. It was a gesture that touched millions. In that quiet humility, the world began to see the essence of a new kind of papacy, one that would echo the spirit of its namesake and strive to renew the church from the heart outward. As the newly elected Pope stepped onto the central balcony of St. Peter's Basilica on March 13, 2013, the world watched in silence. For the first time, the crowds gathered in the square and millions more watching on screens across continents caught a glimpse of Jorge Maria Bergoglio as Pope Francis. Dressed in the simplest of papal attire without the golden cross or ornate vestment typically associated with the office, he paused for a long, humble moment. Then, breaking the centuries-old formality often expected in such a moment, he greeted the world with two disarmingly simple words.
Fratelli e sorelle, buonasera.
It was not a grand theological proclamation or an elaborate blessing, but a plain and human acknowledgement of the people before him. That gentle greeting, offered with a soft smile and warm eyes, immediately disarmed the watching world. It conveyed humility, approachability, and a deep pastoral instinct. This was a pope who saw himself not as a distant ruler, but as a fellow pilgrim among his people. In an age of Zionism and institutional mistrust, the small phrase landed like a quiet revolution. Buonasera was a signal. This papacy would be different. It would be rooted in closeness, not hierarchy, in dialogue, not distance. It was a human moment that transcended borders, languages, and ideologies. What followed further confirmed this new tone. Pope Francis asked the people gathered to pray for him before he offered his blessings to them. Another striking break from tradition. He bowed his head in silence as the square, normally filled with chants and cheers, grew still. It was a moment of spiritual reciprocity where Pope and people became equals before God. This simple introduction, void of pomp yet full of grace, resonated globally. Headlines the next day spoke not of ceremony but of sincerity. For many Catholics and non-Catholics alike, it felt as though the church had taken a breath of fresh air. In just 2 words, Buonasera, Pope Francis had opened a door not only for his pontificate, but to a renewed relationship between the church and the modern world. Pope Francis quickly proved that his was not a papacy of words alone, but of bold and prophetic action. From the earliest days of his leadership, he redirected the moral compass of the Catholic Church outward, toward the forgotten, the suffering, and the marginalized. He made it clear that the Church must not be a fortress of doctrine, but a field hospital present where pain is greatest, tending to wounds both spiritual and societal. One of his most powerful contributions came in 2015 with the release of the landmark encyclical Laudato Si on care for our common home. In it, Pope Francis urgently addressed the global climate crisis, speaking not just as a religious leader, but as a global moral authority. He wove together environmental degradation, poverty, and inequality, calling for a new integral ecology that respects both people and planet. His message was clear. The earth is crying out, and the poor are paying the highest price. The encyclical was hailed by scientists, policymakers, and faith leaders alike, breaking a new ground in the intersection of faith and environmental activism. But his compassion didn't end with creation. It extended to all those on the peripheries of society. Pope Francis consistently championed inclusion, urging the Church to embrace those who had long felt unwelcome: the poor, the divorced, refugees, the LGBTQ+ community, and the people of other faiths. He called for a church that is a mother with an open heart, not a tribunal that closes its doors. His emphasis on mercy became the heartbeat of his pontificate, culminating in the declaration of the extraordinary Jubilee Year of Mercy in 2015-2016. During this time, the Vatican opened its doors symbolically and literally, encouraging acts of reconciliation, forgiveness, and solidarity across the globe. Mercy, he reminded the Church, is the very foundation of the Church's life. Pope Francis also became a tireless advocate for migrants and refugees, reminding the world of their dignity amidst rising nationalism and xenophobia. He visited refugee camps, washed the feet of asylum seekers, and challenged political leaders to build bridges rather than walls. His famous refrain, "Who am I to judge?" spoke volumes about his vision of a compassionate and non-judgmental church. On the global stage, he pushed for economic justice, condemning unfettered capitalism and warning against throwaway culture that treats people and nature as disposable. He insisted that economic systems must serve the common good, not the accumulation of wealth by a few. His voice carried moral weight in discussions on debt, labor rights, and inequality. Equally committed to interfaith dialogue, Pope Francis reached across religious divides with unprecedented warmth, from embracing Grand Imam Ahmed El-Tayeb of Al-Azhar in Egypt to visiting the Western Wall in Jerusalem and signing the document on humanity fraternity in Abu Dhabi. He demonstrated that peace among religions is essential for peace among peoples. In all these ways, Pope Francis recentered the Church not on itself, but on its mission to the world. He became not just a spiritual leader, but a global conscience, speaking for those who often have no voice and reminding humanity of its shared responsibility to protect both its weakest members and its common home. But Pope Francis' papacy was not without trials. Behind the warmth of his gestures and the power of his words lay a turbulent path, marked by resistance, controversy, and the weight of centuries-old structures slow to change. As he sought to reform the Church from within, he encountered deep-seated resistance, particularly from elements within the Roman Curia, the Vatican's complex bureaucracy. Some viewed his calls for simplicity, transparency, and decentralization as a threat to tradition and influence. Efforts to reform the Vatican's finances, address sexual abuse with greater accountability, and bring synodality, shared decision-making, into church governance were often met with quiet obstruction or even open criticism. In conservative circles, his progressive tone on issues like climate change, economic justice, and inclusivity drew ire. Critics accused him of sowing confusion, of being too lenient or too political. A few even questioned his orthodoxy. Moreover, the global sex abuse crisis continued to cast a dark shadow over the Church. Francis faced sharp criticism for initial missteps, such as his handling of abuse cases in Chile. Survivors and advocates demanded more than words. They wanted justice. In time, he responded with stronger policies, summits with bishops from around the world, and a vow that no one, not even bishops, would be shielded from accountability. Still, these wounds ran deep, and the Church's moral credibility had been badly shaken. But through every storm, Francis pressed on. His strength came not from institutional power, but from moral conviction and spiritual clarity. He remained unwavering in his belief that the Church's mission was not to preserve prestige, but to bring healing. Again and again, he invoked a powerful metaphor. The Church is not a museum for saints, but a field hospital for the wounded. This vision reframed the Church's purpose. It was not to enshrine perfect doctrine in marble halls, but to meet people where they are, in suffering, in poverty, in doubt, and in sin. He urged pastors to smell like the sheep, meaning they should live among the people, not above them. For Francis, leadership meant service, and holiness meant compassion. He reminded the church that it must be messy because life is messy, and God meets us in the mess. His papacy, though marked by struggle, was rooted in hope. The hope that even amid scandal, resistance, and criticism, the church could become again what it was meant to be: a beacon of mercy, a home for all, and a voice for justice. In an age where words often outspace deeds, Pope Francis chose a different path, leading not through proclamations alone, but through lived example. He was a papacy defined more by gestures than grand decrees, more by presence than pronouncements. With each act of humility, compassion, and courage, he reshaped what it meant to be Pope in the 21st century. He broke protocol and defined expectations. He chose to live in a modest guest house rather than an apostolic palace, sending a powerful message: the Pope is not a monarch, but a servant of God. He carried his own bag, paid his own hotel bill after his election, and rode in a humble Ford Focus instead of a chauffeured limousine. These small choices spoke volumes. Francis made pastoral visits to prisons, homeless shelters, and refugee camps, washing the feet of the marginalized, including Muslims, women, and prisoners, a striking symbol of radical service. He embraced children with disabilities, consoled the grieving with quiet sincerity, and spent time with the poor, not for photo opportunities, but to listen and be present. He consistently turned the spotlight away from himself and toward the world's wounds: poverty, displacement, ecological collapse, spiritual disconnection. When he did speak, his words were plain, heartfelt, and often poetic, calling for a revolution of tenderness, urging the world not to forget the globalization of indifference. Unlike popes before him, who often ruled with formality and authority, Francis led with authenticity and humanity, redefining papal authority not as a command, but as a companionship. He encouraged dialogue over dogma and listening over lecturing. In doing so, he made the papacy more accessible, relatable, and relevant to people far beyond the walls of the Vatican, even to those who did not share the Catholic faith. His leadership reminded the world that true power lies in integrity and that credibility comes not from titles, but from how one lives. By simply embodying the gospel he preached, Pope Francis gave new life to the office of the Bishop of Rome, not as a throne, but as a shepherd's staff. In the end, it was not papal bulls or doctrinal shifts that defined him, but his witness, a man who led with his feet, with his heart, and with quiet courage. Through these actions, he defined what it means to lead the church in a rapidly changing world, with humility, mercy, and unwavering solidarity with the least among us. As the years wore on, time began to leave its mark on Pope Francis, the once vigorous shepherd who had traveled the world with relentless pastoral zeal, now moved more slowly, his steps careful, his voice softer. Chronic health issues, most notably sciatica and respiratory complications, gradually limited his physical presence. Public appearances became less frequent. Wheelchairs and canes replaced walking shoes. Yet, while age and illness pressed upon his body, his spirit remained unbroken. In the twilight of his papacy, Pope Francis revealed a new kind of strength, the strength of vulnerability, of enduring faith amid human frailty. He showed the world that dignity and holiness do not disappear with decline. Instead, they deepen. His suffering was not hidden or sanitized, but offered as a quiet witness to millions facing their own struggles with aging, illness, or loneliness. Even as his physical strength waned, he continued to lead, not from balconies or global stages, but from a place of stillness, reflection, and profound spiritual wisdom. He became a living testament to perseverance, embodying the Christian belief that suffering, embraced with grace, can become a form of communion. In what would be his final Lenten message in early 2025, Pope Francis offered words that carried the weight of a lifetime of service and sacrifice. With a trembling hand but a resolute heart, he called upon the faithful to walk together in hope. It was a phrase both simple and profound, one that captured the essence of his mission. For him, hope was never a solidarity endeavor. It was something to be shared, nourished in community, and carried forward in love. This message, echoing across a weary and wounded world, became his final pastoral gift, a reminder that even when the road grows steep and shadows fall, we do not walk alone. Faith, he taught, is not the absence of hardship. It is the courage to journey onward, hand in hand, toward the light. In his last days, Francis offered no grand farewell, no sweeping pronouncement. Instead, he remained as he had always been, a humble servant drawing near to God, near to the people, and near to the promise of peace. And as the Church entered the solemn Lent of 2025, the voice of the aging Pope, fragile yet unwavering, resounded in the hearts of millions. Let's walk together in hope. On the morning of March 29, 2025, the bells of St. Peter's Basilica tolled with solemn rhythm, announcing the end of an era. Pope Francis had died peacefully in the Vatican, surrounded by the prayers of those who loved him, the silence of the Church in mourning, and the gratitude of a world forever changed by his witness. He was 88 years old. His passing, though anticipated due to declining health, sent ripples of emotions across continents and faiths. In Rome, the air felt heavy with reverence. Pilgrims began to gather in St. Peter's Square even before sunrise, some with candles, others with tears in their eyes, drawn not just by the news of death, but by a deep sense of personal loss. They came to honor not a prince of the church, but a father of the people. Across Latin America, his homeland mourned with pride and sorrow. From the barrios of Buenos Aires to the Vatican gardens, where he had prayed in quiet hours, his journey had been one of astonishing humility. He was a pope who walked with the poor, spoke plainly to the powerful, and carried the weight of the papal office with gentle strength. Heads of state sent tributes. Religious leaders across traditions offered prayers. The faithful lit candles in cathedrals, churches, and chapels around the globe. Yet, beyond formal ceremony, it was the personal memories that lingered most. A refugee remembered the Pope's embrace. A prisoner recalled the tenderness of his foot washing. A young person spoke of feeling seen in a church that too often felt distant. Francis had led with love, not the lofty love of doctrines and decrees, but the gritty, grounded love of service, forgiveness, and solidarity. He opened doors that had long been closed. He challenged a stagnant church to breathe again. He reminded the world that the gospel is not just something to be preached, but to be lived in simplicity, compassion, and joy. In his death, the world lost a pope, but gained a legacy not carved in marble, but etched into hearts. The fisherman's shoes he wore did not walk a path of power, but of peace. His voice may have fallen silent, but his message endures, that mercy is stronger than judgment, that hope is stronger than fear, and that in the end, it is love that will remain. And so, as the Vatican prepared for his funeral, and the world bowed its head in prayer, the church he so gently shepherded stood at a new threshold. The man who had once stepped out of the balcony and greeted the world with a quiet Buona Sera now returned to the arms of God he served so faithfully. Pope Francis, Jorge Maria Bergoglio, had gone home, but his spirit, his teachings, and his example would echo for generations to come. More than a pope, he was a servant. Jorge Maria Bergoglio, known to the world as Pope Francis, never sought a throne. He sought hearts. He chose a path of servant leadership, grounding the grandeur of the papacy in acts of humility, compassion, and solidarity with the least amongst us. He wore the white cassock, not as a symbol of superiority, but a sign of simplicity and surrender. He walked among the poor, the forgotten, the marginalized, not as a distant figure, but as a brother. His papacy was not defined by doctrine alone, but by the dignity he affirmed in every person he encountered. He showed that greatness lies not in command, but in communion. That true authority is born not from control, but from credibility, and through listening, loving, and lifting others up. He reminded the world that faith must be lived, not lectured. For Francis, belief was not an abstract idea locked in cathedral walls or theological texts. It was a living, breathing presence in everyday life. To follow Christ, he said, was to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, welcome a stranger, and defend the dignity of every human soul. He called for a faith that moved from pews to streets, from altars to action, from ritual to relationship. His gospel was not one of judgment, but of joy, a call to live generously, truthfully, and bravely. He insisted that the church belongs to all, not just to clergy or insiders, but to the broken, the seeking, the questioning, the wounded. He opened doors that had long been shut to women, to the divorced, to the LGBTQ+ individuals, and to those on society's margins. He taught that the church is not for the fortress to be guarded, but a home to be shared. That the mission of the church is not to exclude, but to embrace. Under his leadership, the church was not a museum of saints, but a field hospital for sinners, a place of healing, not judgment. And most of all, he showed that mercy is more powerful than dogma. While never abandoning the church's teachings, he prioritized love over legalism. He remained the faithful that God's justice is always wrapped in mercy, that no one is beyond grace, that redemption is not a privilege, but a promise. In a time of division and dogmatic rigidity, he offered a bridge, reminding us that the heart of Christianity is not fear or rule-keeping, but forgiveness, compassion, and hope. He was, above all, a servant who led by example, a pope who washed feet before offering commands, a man who, in reminding the church of its true mission, renewed its soul. And in doing so, he left behind more than a legacy. He left behind a challenge to live faithfully, love radically, and walk humbly together. His voice echoed far beyond the Vatican into the hearts of believers and non-believers alike. Pope Francis was not merely a religious figure confined in the rituals and boundaries of the Catholic Church. He became a global moral conscience. His words, spoken in humility and conviction, transcended religion, politics, and borders. Whether addressing climate change, poverty, injustice, or human dignity, his voice carried the weight of authenticity and compassion, resonating in cathedrals and refugee camps, corporate boardrooms, and crowded slums alike. To the faithful, He was a shepherd who led with tenderness rather than judgment. To the lapsed and the doubtful, he offered not condemnation, but conversation. To the secular world, he was a rare spiritual leader who spoke in a language of shared humanity, not separation. He could quote the Gospels and still understand the pain of the atheists, the cry of the refugee, the loneliness of the ignored. When he spoke about the earth in Laudato Si, environmentalists found an unlikely ally in the Vatican. When he decried economic systems that kill, economists took notice. When he said, "Who am I to judge?" the world paused, not because of dogma, but because of the radical empathy those words revealed. He became a voice for the voiceless, for the child in war-torn Syria, the migrant drifting at sea, the prisoner seeking redemption, the elderly left behind, and even those who did not share his faith saw in him a man of principle, of compassion, and of courage. He reminded the world that moral authority does not come from power or prestige, but from standing firmly with the vulnerable. And because he stood there, unshaken and sincere, his voice did more than reach ears. It touched hearts, it stirred consciences, it moved humanity. In the noise of a divided world, his voice was a rare and steady light. He walked simply, but his steps changed the world. He was no grand procession in his movements, no opulence in his presence. His gait was steady, unhurried, a man rooted not in status, but in purpose. He wore worn black shoes instead of red velvet, carried his own briefcase, and chose a guest house over a purple palace. These choices seemed small, almost mundane, but they were quietly revolutionary. In each step he took, through slums in Rio, refugee camps in Lesbos, prison cells in Rome, he was rewriting the script of papal power. With each visit to the margins, he was bringing the center closer to those long pushed aside. He did not walk ahead of the people, but among them. He moved through the world like a pilgrim of compassion, a disciple of mercy, a man who believed that the church must first be human before it can be whole. Where others saw issues, he saw individuals. Where others gave speeches, he listened. He stepped into conflict with the calm of a peacemaker, into despair with the light of hope, into tradition with the courage to renew. And in doing so, he shifted the axis of the church from inward protection to outward service, from ritual to relevance. Pope Francis, servant of the servants of God, a title used by popes for centuries, but one he embodied in full. He did not seek followers, but fellow servants. He did not lead from a throne, but from the dusty roads of human need. His life was a sermon without end, a parable in motion, and in his simplicity, he made the gospel visible again. He reminded us that holiness is not distant or severe in its tender. It is just, and it walks beside us. His legacy will not be measured by edicts or architecture, but by the hearts he softened, the bridges he built, and the love he made real in the lives of millions. He walked simply, but his steps changed the world.